Nothing contained in this videocast is intended to encourage the use of illegal substances. This videocast represents only the opinions of the host and their guests and should not be taken as medical or legal advice. In no way does listening, reading, corresponding, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient or legal relationship. The content here is intended to share thoughts and opinions and foster constructive discussion. Please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions concerning cannabis. The views expressed by hosts and guests on this videocast are not necessarily the views of Global Cannabis Times or any other company with which the hosts and guests are associated.
Welcome to another episode of Going Global, Global Cannabis Times video cast that seeks to act as the eyes and ears on the ground in emerging international and state cannabis industries. I'm John Puro, pleased to be your host here, and very lucky and thankful that you two took time out of your schedule. That being our guests, Raphael, Chief Revenue Officer, and Wendy Bronfein, the Chief Brand Officer and Director of Public Policy at Curio Wellness, a multi-state operator. Thank you for being here. Much appreciated. Before we start, though, I have to do my official prayer to the video chat gods. May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy, all dogs and children remain quiet, and may Amazon Prime another time. Amen.
Amen.
Now, the one thing I do need to say is I'm enjoying this particular interview because I'm jealous of your family. Right. You might not know it from the last names, but I'm speaking to two sisters. I believe Wendy is the older sister, just based on general. Okay. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And are you older than David, the third sibling in the
Yes.
wonderful word of Bronfein weed? Okay. There you
Yes.
go. All right. Great. So, look, I'm very, very, happy to have you guys here. Maybe it makes some sense just for you folks to introduce Curio Wellness, the company and how it's situated in the Maryland market, before we get into, discussion of that Maryland market.
Sure. So, hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. So Curio Wellness was established in Maryland when the medical cannabis program began back in 2016. We've been the market leader for the existence of this program. We're family owned and operated. We're originally from Maryland, so we built our entree to cannabis here in Maryland. We have about 250 employees. We do cultivation, processing, and we have a retail dispensary. And given this style of Maryland's market, we deliver our products to about 93 dispensaries across the state. And then we recently announced that we'll be expanding to Missouri.
Great. Thank you. So also, I guess you folks can kind of update, obviously Maryland, pretty significant recent happenings, right? In terms of the law being passed. I remember monitoring it and, as it was coming down the pipeline, and then how the legislators took that kind of like half step to let the voters approve it, and then give them the leeway to, kind of implement the rules. So, I'm kind of curious to know your thoughts. And I also want to do another disclaimer on your behalf and on my behalf, right? Nothing is personal to regulators or lawmakers. None of us would want their jobs juggling all the competing interests, right? We are just expressing our opinions, and may they always look upon us with favor in our dealings with them. So, that being said, I'm curious to know some of your, thoughts in terms of the system that's been implemented for adult use and via the medical system in place, and some of these nuances and things that jump out at you.
I guess in line with your prayer, I lean towards rational and pragmatic decision making. So I actually thought that this session was going to be kind of swift and just like really efficient and productive relative to what we had to do. I saw kind of the creation of this legislation as a Venn diagram. So I think for anyone who touches the cannabis sector, they sort of know there's a layer of hindrances that we have, the federal state conflict and just general stigma that make it hard for us to do business the way any other company could. And so if you have that sort of cloud over you, then the diagram becomes, what can the state do to create an optimal program for this industry to survive and thrive and grow, knowing that there's all these sort of forces against you? And then the other circle is, how do you expand the opportunity to make it to increase independent operations and make it as diverse and equitable as possible? And where those two circles connect is really the prime zone of like the things you want to have in the bill, and the other two become the extras. And perhaps it's a little bit more of the left side than the right side, only because if it's not economically viable, then the right side doesn't really have an opportunity either. But that's sort of the stair steps of how you get there. That was way too logical. It's not how we really got there. And I think the more unfortunate piece is that there were so many states that have done this, and there was such an easy playbook of like, let's steal this idea. It was great. Let's not repeat that idea. It's not the best. And so we do have some stuff in this bill that sort of ignores the realities of what allows for optimal conditions. And I think one of those major areas is that there's a vulnerability towards oversupply, given how the new market could be over canopied and has the potential to be over licensed. It's not that those licenses are actionable. It's just that they've allowed for a large amount that a regulator could ultimately push forth. But I think as long as the regulator understands that there should be a natural cadence of license introductions and a balance of supply and demand to make the program successful for everyone, that can be mitigated. But, I think there's some pieces in there that aren't necessarily ideal for existing or new operators. I think the moratorium on licenses going to make it really hard for new people to raise capital, and as well as existing people, because nobody really wants to give their money into a company that can't move for 5 years and doesn't have the freedom to exit when it's best for themselves and their investors. And I think there's some things in advertising that were taken away that we used to have, and there's a lot of language that makes it look like it'll be really hard to market your company. Done that without incident or obscenity for 5 years. I think there should have been more trust in the licensees and the regulator to maintain it, because I think in particular about the new operators, right? You have this whole new opportunity. If you're extremely constrained on how you can market your business and let people know about it, how are you going to succeed, particularly when there's even more competition?
Got it. Rebecca, anything you want to, by the way, just to be clear, when you reference the moratorium, right? So just as you're saying, it's a moratorium on transferring within this.
Yeah. So essentially there's sort of two parts to it. So all existing operators who convert into this new program on July 1st, their licenses will now be locked up for 5 years. You would not be able to sell or transfer your license for 5 years. Anyone new who comes into the program gets a license award and operationalizes that license, would then also start a 5-year clock when they could not sell or transfer their license.
That is a long clock, right? Speaking from states where hopefully the regulators aren't watching, because it will say Maryland in the title of this podcast. I mean, we're talking about 2-year clocks here, and that already has had a significant impact on investments, right? With the level also of transparency in the corporate documents that we're looking at. So, Rebecca, I'm kind of curious to hear your own take, on the system that's been put in place in terms of adult use, and as a reference point with medical and your family's company in it. So, please riff away.
Happy to. So, I think Wendy does a really excellent job of articulating some of the trials or the challenges that are upon us now that we actually have the bill. But if I kind of step out of the world that we're in right now, we started Curio Wellness, or Wendy and our dad, Michael, did in 2014 because he came from an institutional pharmacy background. He understood regulated business, and they also saw an opportunity to marry science, holistic medicine with the power of the cannabis plant in a way that we didn't see happening in other markets. So we were fortunate to be awarded licenses, and we've used that to focus our energy on medicinally derived products that improve your quality of life. And originally our stance was, we need to keep the medical program strong. We want to be able to do research and clinical trials to the best of our ability. And in markets that had gone adult use very quickly, all of those efforts kind of dissipated. So about 18 months, 2 years ago, we really made a conscientious switch in terms of what was important to Curio as it related to Maryland's market. And it really was clear that adult use was the best path forward for our condition specific products, because you're having access to 160,000 patients versus 3 million potential consumers that for whatever reason haven't gotten involved in the medical program. So as soon as we kind of changed our ethos and realized that it was more about access at this point, or at that point, then we fought really hard to make sure that people knew about the referendum in question 4. And like one of my favorite moments of like working with my family is that the night before election day, when I drove around Baltimore County and put out yes on 4 signs, because it was that important to us that people had awareness that this was now a choice they could have. So despite the challenges that we're facing now, there's still this unbelievable opportunity for people who prior had concerns about stigma, concerns about the fees, concerns about how to have a conversation with their doctor. Now they'll have the freedom to go into a dispensary and have that conversation with trained bud tenders, kind of have more open conversations with their friends who've been using cannabis for 4 to 5 years now in Maryland, and feel confident that there's a locally owned brand that is really here for them. Like that is our reason for being, is to make great cannabis products that you can trust. So I know her day-to-day is a lot more stressful, but from my day-to-day, I just think it's a huge opportunity, and it's really exciting to just be able to expand the audience that we can kind of share our learnings with.
I love it. Right. And, you guys talk, I like to say that this industry has a unique capacity to do good. And at various points in your answers, you alluded to like the 2 main, things that I'm referring to when I say that, right? So, Wendy, in one of your first answers, you were talking about, the Venn diagram, right? And one of the, the aspects of part of it was the idea of social equity, right? I mean, there's been unequal enforcement of the laws, and, kind of referring that there was this like central place, right? The crossover in the Venn diagram, where I always like to say that, business and social equity concerns can be symbiotic, right? And produce probably better results than regulators who, when they, try to construct things, it never plays out the way that they intend it, and also, like you said, really your basis in love and devotion and background of your father, coming from the medical aspect, right? Because we are scratching the tip of the surface in terms of studies that, the benefits that we'll get. I always monitor the stuff coming out of Israel because they're, years ahead of us in terms of research, the medical benefit and the continued focus on that. And also you said that you could apply, certain aspects of it. So, I mean, focusing on the social equity, right? Oh, see, I didn't turn my phone on silent. How dare I? So focusing on kind of like the social equity, I'm curious to know your thoughts about the construction of it. Right. This is a state, obviously, where there was, unequal enforcement of the laws, and, your thoughts on the approach to that, how you focus, as a business in terms of some of these things, and how we could see that potentially developing out, hopefully in a positive way.
Yeah, so there's a couple different facets of the bill, well, the referendum as well as the bill, that deal with kind of rectifying systemic wrongs as well as creating business opportunity. So the expungement piece is in there as part of the referendum and is dealt with as well in the bill in terms of correcting people who have records and then were detained or arrested for cannabis related issues prior to this legalization. There's also a number of reinvestment funds that are created in order to give back to communities, as well as funds that support any new operators to help them start up, because there's a realization of this is a capital intensive but private investment industry. And so the state recognized that they need to be able to at least be part of the Kickstarter for licenses. And then on the licensing side, they have set it up as a kind of limited application with certain standards to meet, a very low participation fee, and a lottery system for selecting winners. So those are kind of the 3 places where they've worked to address major issues to kind of right wrongs.
Got it. Appreciate, I think that's a good, important insight. Now, you folks also have an interesting perspective because you're not just in the state of Maryland, right? You're also, Missouri, right, is another part of Curio in terms of your initiatives. So I'm curious to know any other, like we're talking about reference points, where we're talking about regulators, are they learning from other states, right? I was so hopeful, when I was looking at, when the bill is being worked on and they were talking about a sliding scale of increasing taxes, which would be an intelligent approach to try and, get a leg up on the illicit market that has certain built-in advantages like not paying taxes, not worrying about 280E. I was just curious in terms of also your perspective of having such a specific reference point, and that being another hot, state market that could probably be on its own going global episode, if it hasn't already, since they go fast. But curious to hear your thoughts, any additional thoughts come out of that specific comparison for you?
Oh, I think we're just getting into Missouri. We're hoping to have our products in market by the end of Q3, beginning of Q4 of this year. But in going there, I've been fortunate to meet with other growers, processors, met many dispensary operators, and spend some time looking at their regulations, especially as they transition from medical to adult use. And they've really proven to be a gold standard. I mean, they've created a program that answers the call of the people. We want access to this type of product, medical or recreational. We recognize that it can be a revenue stream for the state, but we're not going to create such a burden on taxes that it helps the gray market or the illicit market continue to thrive. And in general, there's just a fabulous energy in Missouri around cannabis. And when you walk into dispensaries, the people who are both behind the counter and in front of the counter feel like their state has done them this real service. There's an appreciation for the access, but there's also an appreciation for the quickness with which they got the program off the ground. So it's really all like wonderful unicorns and rainbows when you're in a dispensary, and how the community feels. So I think we're hopeful that our program is going to start on July 1st, to the best of our knowledge. And I can only hope that in Maryland, there's that same unbelievable energy of excitement that now everyone has access to cannabis that you see in Missouri.
I may have to go, I mean, being a trademark lawyer geek, I may have to go trademark unicorns and rainbows as a cannabis brand. I think that would play well in certain demographics.
They're just the nicest people too. I traveled with a colleague of mine. I kept saying to her, is it me? Are these like the nicest people?
I mean, I'm from New York, so, right. It's always refreshing traveling. Right. When it comes down to it. So I'm, also curious, Rebecca, in terms of like, thinking about the differences, in the actual retail environment, right, that you're going to see going from, medical to adult use, like the implementation of this, the different, I mean, you're talking about the feel in a Missouri, store on the adult use side. I'm curious to know, your kind of thoughts in terms of how that, how you anticipate that fleshing out in Maryland.
Yeah, we are working really closely with our dispensary partners, the retailers now, to do two things. One, to make sure that they will have a steady stream of inventory, because we don't want people to be waiting in line like we've seen in other states, especially at the onset, and then they get to the counter and the thing that they're excited about isn't there. So our team is very committed to making sure that shelves are stocked. And then at the dispensary level, once you're there, there's different things contemplated in the bill. So for example, dispensaries will have the ability to choose how they service medical versus adult use customers. The hours of operation, for example, that's all at the retailer's discretion, but there'll be a 9% sales tax for adult use patients. And we anticipate that there will be a 10 milligram cap for dosage products if you're not a medical card member. So you will have to be, if you continue to have your medical card, you'll continue to have access to all the same products you have now. Whereas if you let it lapse, your menu essentially will shrink based on the regulations or whatever the regulators put into place.
Don't you just love those arbitrary, dosage caps and everything, like in our New York regs? It's like, oh no, beverages, other things, 5 milligrams, tinctures up to 1,000 milligrams in a tiny little container, right? The arbitrariness of it all is just always never, I mean, shouldn't be surprising to any of us at this point. I'm kind of curious too, right? I'm looking at the different state markets, how there are these, domino effects in area. It just so happens that Maryland is between two of the most interesting, different legalization regimes, right? With DC's, citizens voting for, and I always cover DC in my state news section of my podcast out of principle. Voting for adult use way back when, congressional not getting, the sign off on the rider. And so now they get to self-certify as men. Don't go to a doctor. You could self-certify. We are all doctors that could write a prescription for any condition that we think that marijuana, that marijuana could help with, like say Fast and the Furious movie boring-itis, right? Let's liven this up. Everything's better on weed, like the Jon Stewart cameo in Half Baked, right? So you got that, and then you got Virginia, which Democrats legalizing legislatively and then promptly losing control of two of the three pieces of the state government. I'm just curious to know how much do you think that impacts? Are you guys banking on a healthy amount of out-of-state business from these, scenarios, and then seeing that, melt away if Virginia actually ever gets its act together?
I think that the state does contemplate that you would have border states impact on the overall market. I mean, you gave a lot of disclaimers. I'm going to give a disclaimer clearly. Like, it is for use inside of the state of Maryland if you're over 21 buying in Maryland. So I'm making an assumption that you are visiting, staying, and consuming in Maryland. But I also think, because when this was all being contemplated, I do think that the other states can be like a rallying cry when someone's trying to pass the law. And I do I think Colorado is probably the strongest example of like the tourism factor as the first mover and having their own window. I think it will contribute, but I don't think that like people are going to be coming to Maryland because of it. I think it's just something else that is there. And yeah, I think over the next, 2 to 5 years, we're probably going to see all our neighbors convert, and then it's just going to be moot. So it kind of goes back to that thing of the foundations of the bill and the program we have need to be what are sustainable and create a thriving environment for what exists inside of Maryland, because the assumption is there's no federal change that's imminent. So how is this the strongest program it can be and best for Maryland?
I do think that it's really wonderful in some ways for our dispensaries that are at the kind of perimeter and the stretches of the state, because in those areas, it tended to be harder to get dispensary approval. So even if you wanted to go into the business, you had more red tape. So those that have thrived now almost have this opportunity to increase their business even more, meet with more people. And in some ways, it's a little bit of a nice feeling of like, okay, you've powered through for 5 years, and now you have this additional benefit. Given that you're not in as heavily populated an area, or it was that much harder for you to even get into the industry.
I mean, I relate to that, right? When I see New York happening right now, and you look around at the OGs from the networking events 5 or 6 years, like the investment of time, you guys have invested so much, right? And also trying to push it forward, right, in the right way, which is why when I meet people like you in different states, I say, thank you for your service, right? In terms of trying, you guys did it, right? You made it. So, I mean, one thing I always like to do, and you could choose which name you want because I still have not been able to decide. We've certainly been doing it a bit, but, I want you folks to picture yourselves with like, your wizard, witch outfits on. All right. And you guys can be Tokerdamus or Smokerdamus, and kind of predict the future of the Maryland market, in whatever time increments you want. You want to make it 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, whatever it is. I'm just queuing up this softball or just, this nice, easy question for you guys to kind of put your thoughts out there. And, Wendy, I agree with you, right? Let's not hold our breath for federal. Safe banking looked golden at the end of last year. And then Mitch McConnell caught wind of it and that went bye-bye.
Well,
So
I will give you a hot tip. I was sent an email last night saying that It is meant to resurface today or tomorrow at the latest, in a more consolidated form, really focused on depository banking and insurers. Which, you know what, if it's incremental the way we get there, then let's get something done. Because at a minimum, people need to be able to safely put their money in a bank, pay
Right.
their employees with direct deposit, and function from that level of normality.
As I like to say, right, it's not going to be federal legalization bit by bit, but hit by hit. Hashtag pot puns or dad jokes, according to my wife and daughters. Yeah, so please, I like the inside scoop. And so, let me know your thoughts in terms of Tokerdamus, Smokerdamus predictions.
Okay, I'm not sure what year level. I'm not gonna give you a year. I'm just gonna give you like the
Spin a
fantasy,
fake wheel, with the
Mhm.
years on it, and just go off that.
the fantasy picture, the hope. I think that you have been able to consistently maintain a really stable level of supply and demand. I think we all know at a base level, none of these programs survive without that, which means that we're consistently balancing the overall number of licenses we have to the market demand and the overall population. I think we know today that the number one area where the state could grow is in dispensaries. More points of distribution increase the program in a much more meaningful way than anything that would resolve an additional product. And I think that we will have seen a program. Look, let me say it to you this way. In 2014, we went to step into this. I was told when doing research in Colorado, it will always take longer, it will always cost more, and it will always start out more regulated and wean off. And so I think if we can have better cost structures that come from like less stigmatization of our status as cannabis, I think if we get through things more efficiently from a regulatory perspective. And I think if even now, like we're seeing it, we're going into adult use and through a lens that is more regulated than what we dealt with in medical. And I think that's hard for many of us who are existing because we didn't prove ourselves to be unethical or operators who presented a lot of the issues that the fears drove in this bill. So I think hopefully some of this stuff comes down and we can have an effective marketplace that provides people with a robust product mix of safe products, quality products. You can market your business as you need to. And there's more jobs created, there's more give back to the community, and all of the operators who are participating really find themselves in that generational wealth and professionally kind of rewarding experience.
Rebecca.
I don't know how to follow that. Uh,
I'm a younger sibling, right? I'm going to vote for your answer no matter what. No,
I echo everything she said so wonderfully. I would also say at a very pragmatic or practical level, eliminating the federal state conflict and allowing transfer of product across state lines. So we're in Maryland and Missouri. We have to create and stand up basically two identical operations in different states. And the capital expense involved in that ultimately trickles down into the cost of our product. And so being able to create a hub, a facility and distribution centers, just like any other cultivation or manufacturing industry, would ultimately help the end consumer because it allows us to spread our cost of doing business over a larger territory. And that I often think is overlooked or just taken for granted in this conversation, but it's a real reality that we live with, and it's a tough pill to swallow at sometimes.
Yeah, the federal wish obviously is more than anything 280E is dealt with.
Yeah,
agreed.
Has been
Right?
dealt with
Just
in
that.
Maryland on the
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I like to see, look, you'd like to see momentum, you like to spot trends, right? So the state's addressing the issue of 280E is certainly, a nice step in the right direction. And, at the same time, also, people would, play safe banking as a silver bullet, right? But it wouldn't change like those disclosure forms that, they would have to fill out, which would
Right.
still have, a negative impact in the financing world there. It'd just be, look, I'm still hoping also that New York coming on as a financial capital of the world, the East Coast, right, with the prominence of it in Maryland, coming on, that'll have that, positive impact too. But I just, I really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules. And also, while Wendy is imminently expecting another addition to the Bronfein brood, really appreciate your taking, the time out here to share, so much experienced insight, right? And insight on the evolution of how we got here, about Maryland, a state that many, many people are very, very excited about. So just wanted to thank you. And any last thoughts or, anything, please, now is the time to toss them out there, or we could wrap it up nice and early, just in case Wendy goes into labor earlier than expected.
Oh my God, no, just kidding.
No, thank you for having us. I think it's a real privilege to be able to work with your family, but also the 200 plus employees we have. A lot of them have been around from the beginning. So we consider them extended family. And, we wake up every day, we work really hard because we want to make sure that we supply the best Curio products to Marylanders and that they have the best cannabis to choose from. And that's what ultimately is going to make our state kind of a shining program and a model for those who come after us. So it's a real privilege. And thank you for allowing us to spend some time with you.
Oh, no, it was great. And I want to know, when they join the work fam, do you make them try gefilte fish as like a test of, their
Everybody
resolve,
gets a bar mitzvah.
We have to end on that, right? We have to end on that.